So I've used some Zinsser Bullseye Primer from Home Depot and some blue acrylic paint to prime the page of this Stillman Burn sketchbook, a medium to medium light blue. And I've gone both ways, up and down and this way, to kind of create a little bit of a tooth on the paper. My primer is really thick. You can see I had to add some water to it, but it's still working. It's trying to buckle just a little bit, so I will add some clips here. All right, so I'm excited to begin this painting of Lillian Genth from Cheekwood's Permanent Collection here in Nashville. This is a floor to ceiling sized painting, 55 wide by 65 tall. It's beautiful. It's one of my favorites, and so I just have butterflies thinking about starting it. I have printed off a black and white copy just so that I can have it really close by as I'm just doing a quick sketch to lay it out. I've spent a couple of minutes already measuring and checking a few things. I went ahead and divided the canvas into half. This is 8 inches wide, so I went ahead and just drew a line right down the center. My Stillman Burn sketchbook is 9 by 12, and this is 8.5 by 11, so it's pretty similar. I'm not going to do it exactly the same size. I want to show you how to transfer from a different size. So the first thing I do after dividing it in half this way, and that just helps me kind of see where the body should go, because my first instinct will be to plunk her right dead in the center. And you can see from dividing it in half that her head is right, the front of her forehead is right in the center. So that would have already gotten me started in a bi-direction. The next thing I'm going to do is see how many heads tall this figure is. My photograph is cut off, so I don't have the whole painting. I'll have to just stop with this. But she is a little more than 5 heads tall, so I'm measuring from the top of her bun to her chin. The first head. The second head is to her waist. The third head is to her, almost to her wrist. The fourth head comes just down midway in her skirt. The fifth head almost to the bottom, and there's about a third left. So now, if you're using a big canvas or a different size, I want to come over here and make a mark. I've divided my canvas in half, or my paper, and I want to decide how big I want her on this page, and I want to start just right here below the top of the page, and I want to fit a little more than 5 heads in here. So I'm going to guess to start with, and this is the part that confuses folks a lot, but I'm going to say this is a head width. 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's exactly 5. So I need to come up here and make it a little smaller because it needs to be a little more than 5 heads. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a little more is left over at the bottom. So that's close. I could probably bump these down just a tiny bit. So that's all you have to remember, is to decide where your top and bottom are going to be, how many heads tall it is, and then you have to divide this space into the equal amount of heads to know how large the head should be. I can also check and see how many heads wide she is at her widest point, which is probably right here where her knee is. So she's 2 heads wide. Let's see how she measures right here from her chest. From her bust, almost to the edge of her arm, is another head. The size of her book is a little less than a head. So you can use the head as a relative length for the whole painting. The other thing I can check is where is my halfway mark vertically. I've already figured it out horizontally. And I'm going to guess it's this banister. Let me check it and see. It's pretty close. The banister is a little lower than half. This would be the halfway mark here. So I can come over here from the very top of my painting. So the banister is a little lower than halfway right here. So now I know where that banister needs to go. And I'm gonna double check that. From the top of the canvas, it's this is a little bit shorter than this section. So now, you know, there's probably a couple of other things I could check. Where's the halfway mark at the bottom of the banister here? You can always do halfway marks. That's a really good way to check yourself. So it's a little bit higher than halfway here. A little higher than halfway, maybe a little bit lower than that. So I know the banister is going to be about that big. I can also use straight across the plumb line and see that the table is almost even with the bottom of this banister. I can put a little mark there. And we know that the banister runs all the way across here. It is on a bit of a diagonal, not much. My book is leaning a bit, but a little bit on a diagonal here. You really don't see much of it's mostly lost in flowers here, but there is a little bit of banister peeking through on each side. I'm using charcoal again because this paper is a little absorbent at this stage and chalky. I've used Zinsser and a little blue acrylic paint. So I don't want to use paint. I don't think the paint will move around good for me, and my drawing will be challenging. So I'm also going to, this is the first head length. So let's double check it. 1, 2 to her waist, 3 to her wrist, 4 to the mid section of her dress, and 5. There's a definite tilt to her head, and I found the halfway mark for the head from the top of the bun to right about her eyebrows is the halfway mark. And there's also a definite tilt to her head. So if you don't get this in, you're going to struggle with this head the whole time. So I can double check it with my charcoal and guess that the eyebrows are going to fall right about in here. And this seems to be the tilt to her head. So with that, I've noted a couple of things. The width of her dress from her knee over is 2 heads. From her bust line almost to the back of her arm is another head width. So those are things I can check myself. The pot is a head width. The width of the pot is a head width. So I'm going to go ahead and start drawing with that. So you see I've already done it. Again, I've put the head over here, and the front of her head is right about in here. Top of her bun. Her head does not extend over this halfway line. So I'm going to have to really make myself work to keep the shape of this overall head from getting too large. Here's the top. Here's the bottom of where her chin should be. Again, there's the length of the head from here to here. So I can also check from my halfway line over to the point of her chin. And that's the same as the whole length of her face. So her face is in. It starts right here at the eyebrow line, maybe extends up a bit. This is the brows. Pivot that around and make sure I'm right with it. Starting to get a little bit big. It's easy for a head to grow on you as you go. It's nice to use the charcoal because it's really easy to erase the charcoal. And I'm going to look for simple shapes at this point. I'm not drawing any real details, but I want to make sure I get this angle right. So I'm thinking about hands of the clock. This is 12 o'clock, the back of her head. As we move over, everything sort of pivots from her chin, and this is probably 10:30. So I can come over here and make sure I get that angle right. She's got a pretty pronounced tilt going on here. The top of her head, if I really pay attention, I can see a circle of her skull here. And so that would be my first estimate of the simple shape of her head. From here to here is more than a half. So the back of her head is a bit more than just a half from here to here. So that's about right. If I follow her neck, I can see about that much of her bun. So her neck comes back a little further than I first guess. And the back of her head is straight up and down. If I follow the back of her head, it kind of comes almost down to right here on her jawbone. A little bit of a circle that wraps there. I'm not thinking about the nose or anything at this point. Her neck, I can check the width of her neck. It's hard to see on this black and white picture. The width of her neck is about 3/4 of one of these halves of her head. So I can check that, and that's about right. That looks really skinny, but that's right. Then her dress, I can see, comes down just about that far. If you move slowly, you can see all these measurements a lot better if you just inch your way down slowly. From her bun comes right through about the halfway mark of her head. So right here, again, that's about halfway. I'll go ahead and make a little note for that. That just helps me remember there's kind of a bun up there and a headband. Then her ear is also at about the halfway mark. Now you may have to check that halfway mark a couple times because on the tilt here, it'll throw you off a little. But the ear is right just in from the back of the neck. I'm not worried about features or anything at this point. And you can also use negative space right here. Let me draw a line right here so you can see that better. This is your halfway mark. So you can see that from here to the neck is almost a half. So here to the neck is almost a half. That's right. And then remember that the waist is the next head length. Make these a little darker so you can see them. So her waist is not going to go any, and it's straight across right here. Her waist is. So I can come right across here and make sure I have that straight. That will keep me from making her too long-waisted. And I can use this little negative space right here to know exactly where the bottom of her bust line is. Her bust line does not hit the halfway mark. A little bit of a hump to her shoulder here. And her sleeve. And then matching angles. My line comes in this way. Now I can also check the width of her waist to the edge of her arm and see what that corresponds to. And that is one head width. So that's right on. Her arm extends. And I know the third head is right here at her wrist. So that gives me a good indicator of how long her arm needs to be, because it'll be real easy to misjudge that. Hard to see on this black and white. And then remember, at first, when you first put these arms in, it'll be easy to make them look wooden. And that's okay. We'll go back in there and think about the anatomy of the arm and the muscles. Round those out a little bit. All right, so our arm's going to go. Let's see, this is the halfway mark, which is the railing. See, I already misjudged that. So this is the railing. That's not where her wrist goes. The wrist is actually down here. This is where her wrist will be, which makes a lot more sense. When I draw hands, I don't think about any fingers at this point. And again, I'm matching angles. So this pad of her hand is a vertical. This is a diagonal till about 1 o'clock. And this is a vertical. And I'm just drawing the simple shape of the hand. To the knuckles. And she's holding a book, so she's got her thumb extended, and then her knuckles are bent, so they're just foreshortened. You see a little bit of her pinky here. I can go ahead and check to see how close her hand is to this halfway mark. And it is about 3/4 of the halfway mark on her head. So that's about right. Her hand to the halfway mark. Now I can go ahead and add the book in as I'm moving down. Matching angles, that's going up to about 9:30 or close to 10 o'clock. It goes almost to the railing, but just short of the railing. And I can see that the wrist mark, the third head mark, is almost halfway down the book. This would be straight, and so you see there's a small degree of tilt to the angle on the book. And you can see it's not perfectly straight, so you don't need to get your ruler out. It's an old book. You can see that you can feel the softness and the bend to it. So you don't want to overestimate that or try to make it too sharp and perfect. I can also see, now that I have the book in, that the back side of her body, her butt, comes around just like that and ends up being kind of flush with the book. Extends a little bit here. Okay, back here to the waist. The dress continues out like the wind's blowing it a little bit. And as you work your way down here at the widest point, where maybe the knee is, you can check it, and it's the same as almost the whole head, a little more than 3/4 of the head. So down here where the knee is, it's going to come out about this far. Then this rest of the dress is almost vertical. It has a little bit of a tilt to it. If you're not sure, you can come back over here and double check her dress and see it's half and half, about 3/4 of the way down here. So I may have something a little bit off. Maybe it needs to be a little more like that. Now we know where the top of the table is because we made a note earlier, and the railing here. This is the top of the railing. This is the width of the railing. There are 3 spindles showing. At this point, I'm just going to put And I would check those to see if they're perfectly vertical. They should be, so she's not leaning down the hill, but see, my brain wanted to make them a little crooked. But those need to be parallel with the side of your canvas, so make sure you get those in right. When I paint them, I'll indicate the thickness. There's a shadow down here, and you do see these railings throwing a shadow this way. See a little bit of a shadow here. I like to draw the shapes of the shadows. That just helps anchor the drawing. The table is about here, and I misjudged that line. If you're not sure, hold it up. It's about like this, and then about like that, runs off. Right next to it on the corner here is a leg. And there's another back leg over here, I think. Looks like it has 4 legs. The thickness of the table and the beginning of the pot. And remember, we know the pot is the same width as a head. So we can come over here directly across from her fingers and know that the pot is going to be about that wide, a head wide. And that looks about right. And get your centrifugal motion going and get a circle in here of the pot. You can also check the height of the pot and see how that compares to the width. It's about 2/3. Here's the width. And about 2/3 there. So what to do about all these flowers? You don't really want to draw those in right now, but you could go ahead and make a little place for them, which is kind of what I like to do. Just wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. We do see her hand coming down here. Her arm, I'm sorry. A little piece of her arm. The bottom of her hand runs horizontally even with the book here. All right, so I ran out of video and didn't realize it. Let me just make a few more notations for you. I went ahead and determined that the bottom of this shade runs almost parallel with the bottom of her sleeve, and it's at a little bit of a tilt. It's not perfectly straight, so the bottom of her sleeve. I measured from the halfway line here to the edge of the shade, and that is a little less than a head tall. So that's where the edge of the shade goes. I also put a little bit of these hollyhocks, a little bit of a filling, and I went ahead and masked in any dark areas just to kind of ground me a little bit. There's a shadow under her hand. Comes over. This shadow extends down to the 4th head measurement. Another shadow right here. These shapes of light that are coming start right about the book. And that gives me another little thing to check. There's a little bit of a billow outwards here that makes her dress look more like it's blowing. Those are all things we can correct with the paint. I can double check the width of her dress. Remember, I believe that was 2 heads tall, a little less than 2 heads tall. So that's pretty close. And I think that's got a good rough in of where we're going to go with this. I did also divide the face in half. Her nose, from eyebrows to bottom of nose and bottom of nose to chin, is exactly the same. So I'll put a little indicator of where her nose should go. And I'll go ahead and put her mouth, the bottom lip looks like about the halfway mark on this bottom piece. That's about all I'm going to do right now for her face. I'm going to have to zoom in to work on that face. And I believe this may be humped up a little bit more. Okay. I did decide to come back over and mass in some of these shadow shapes, just to give me a feeling of, there's some shadow shape here. Bottom of the table is mostly in shadow. Bottom of this pot is in shadow. There's quite a bit of shadow around these flowers here. It helps a little bit for me to make a little abstract shape as to where these things are going. So the bottom of the shade and the top of this shadow shape here are even. Again, this is the bottom of the blind that's coming down just below her waistline. Okay.